Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez and I'm talking to everybody out there on YouTube land from Martin in the state of Tennessee in the United States of America. And not long ago, just a few days ago, I was on a Spanish language podcast talking about this man, about whom we're going to be talking today. We're going to be discussing a little bit of his life and a little bit of his career. And so that gave me an idea that I should bring this man, not him, of course, because he's been gone for about 13 years, but his life, his legacy, and his music to the channel. I'm talking about this man right here on this CD, Rufus Harley. And this CD is called Courage, the Atlantic Recordings. And Rufus Harley is maybe not very well known right now, and maybe not everybody remembers his name. He is a great jazz man, but one of those that sometimes get forgotten, sometimes are simply mentioned as a footnote in the history of jazz, and that's too bad because he had a great deal of talent and he was absolutely unique for many reasons. One of them being the fact that, as you can see on the cover right there, more or less, he was a bagpiper and he played bagpipe jazz. That's what we're calling this video, Rufus Harley and Bagpipe Jazz. One of the few African-American jazz musicians who, without a single drop of Celtic blood in his veins, at least as far as we know, he was a man of African and also Cherokee descent. But as far as we know, he had no connection to Scotland or Ireland or any of the Celtic countries, but he was really interested in the bagpipe, and he became known as one of the few practitioners of that instrument within the context of jazz. He was born in 1936 in Raleigh, North Carolina, but early on he moved to Philadelphia, where he would live for pretty much the rest of his life. He would learn to play the saxophone and the trumpet there, and at first he wasn't really thinking about becoming a professional musician. Around 22 years old, he continued his musical learning, taking up other instruments such as the flute and the clarinet and the oboe, but so far, no bagpipe. His teacher, he was one of the students of Denis Sandol, who, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that Italian last name correctly, probably Sandoli, Denis Sandoli, a very interesting, although not very well-known figure on the Philadelphia jazz scene in the 1950s and 1960s. With this man, Rufus Harley, kept learning different instruments, and in his early 20s he was already a multi-instrumentalist, play several different instruments, and of course he was interested in jazz, and that's the kind of music that he gravitated towards. No bagpipe yet, though. This would happen in November 1963, and actually John Fitzgerald Kennedy would have something to do with it. Unfortunately, JFK was killed in November of 1963, and during the funeral for JFK, Rufus Harley, probably on the TV, saw a group of bagpipers, the Scottish Black Watch, who were playing during the procession for the funeral of JFK, and became interested in the sound, the unique, the different, strange in a way, sound of the bagpipe. And so he decided he had to find a bagpipe and learn how to play it. He could play other reed instruments, other wind instruments, but he had never had the chance to learn or even see in person a bagpipe. And in fact, it was hard for him to find a bagpipe. He went all over Philadelphia trying to find one, and he wasn't able to. So finally, during a trip to New York City, he was able to find a used bagpipe, and he bought it, and this gives us an idea of how talented Rufus Harley was for music. It didn't take him very long to learn how to play the bagpipe, just a few months really, he played in a sort of like a different, unique sort of way as far as the technique of playing the bagpipe. It was not the usual technique, but it had certain differences in the way that he approached the instrument, and for the most part he was self-taught. He learned how to play the bagpipe himself, and one thing that was very interesting is how he was able to adapt the sound of the bagpipe to the context of jazz music, which is not an easy thing to do. The sound is really unique, very personal, and actually very attractive too. Beyond the novelty of, having somebody playing the bagpipe in the context of jazz, his sound was really attractive, and that earned him a lot of recognition from certain people, including John Coltrane and Dexter Gordon, Dizzy Gillespie. He earned their respect playing the bagpipe in jazz. Of course, in the records that he made over the decades, he didn't record a lot, but he recorded some really interesting albums. And he also played other instruments in those albums, not just the bagpipe, but also the flute or the saxophone. And he also recorded as a sideman with other jazz greats, such as, for example, Herbie Mann, the album Wailing Dervishes from 1967. Sonny Rollins, Rufus Harley, appears on an album called The Cutting Edge from 1974, and saxophonist Sonny Stitt as well. There's an album called Deuces Wild from 1966 that also has Rufus Harley. That album by Sonny Stitt actually was recorded for Atlantic, which was the label that Rufus Harley recorded for in the beginning of his career, especially in the 1960s and the early 1970s. If you look for information on Rufus Harley online, you'll find some interesting articles, and it is mentioned in some of the articles that you may find online, this anecdote about the time around 1963, 1964, when he was still learning to play the bagpipe. And of course, he wasn't proficient on the instrument yet, so he was making a ton of noise. And his neighbors were not very happy about that. And so they would call the police on him. And as soon as the police officers arrived at the door of Rufus Harley's apartment, he would hide the bagpipe, open the door, and when the police officers inquired about the noise of bagpipes coming out of his apartment, he supposedly would say to them, "A bagpipe? Do I look like I'm Irish or Scottish?" So, in that way, supposedly, or so the legend, or so the story goes, he was able to get away with it. And of course, the neighbors might not be very happy about it, but he kept practicing, and very soon he became really proficient, and you can hear that on the records that he made. He lived most of his life in Philadelphia, where he also taught a little bit, and he gave lectures about the bagpipe and about his music. He would wear very often for his concerts or TV appearances. He appeared on several TV shows, sometimes playing the bagpipe, and sometimes simply, on as a guest on shows like What's My Line or something like that. But he used to wear for personal appearances full Scottish garb, including a kilt and also the tartan, the specific pattern of fabric that different families in Scotland use. Apparently, one of those families saw him perform and enjoyed his music so much, thought he was so unique, that they sent him their own tartan, their own pattern that was associated with their family, and he really enjoyed having that, and he would use it in live appearances very, very often. He passed away in 2006, around 13 years ago. He had prostate cancer, and therefore he left this world fairly early, really, if you think about it. He would have made some more recordings. That would have been great if he had been able to make more recordings, but unfortunately he passed away in 2006, and actually throughout his life he was active in more ways than one, because he actually had 16 children and 15 grandchildren, apparently. Some of his offspring is actually became musicians as well. And in any case, may be furthering the legacy of their father. If you've never heard Rufus Harley, you are in for a treat, because this is really fantastic music. And the album that I would recommend to finish this video is this one that I was showing at the beginning of the video. It's a compilation called Courage, the Atlantic Recordings, and this includes all 4 of Harley's albums that he recorded for Atlantic Records between 1965 and 1970. The titles of all these albums are Bagpipe Blues, Scotch and Soul, A Tribute to Courage, and King/Queens. And these are perfect examples of the music of Rufus Harley. Of course, he's not playing the bagpipe throughout the whole album, and I think that was a good decision in that it gives a lot more variety to the sound of these albums. But he also plays the flute, he also plays the saxophone, and he does some very interesting material here. We're talking about some originals, some blues-influenced numbers, some Celtic-influenced numbers that have been adapted to the jazz idiom. Talking about some tunes like Carrie Dancers, for example. But of course, he also taps into the American songbook here and there. There's Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, for example, in here. Also, there is a certain influence of gospel music on some of these tracks. Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child is one of the tracks on here. And Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, that's another song that appears in here, which has a gospel root relationship with gospel music. But then he also, goes for some more contemporary tracks like Sunny, for example. There's also a version of Chim Chim Cheree here from the Sherman Brothers soundtrack to the 1964 Walt Disney movie Mary Poppins. There's a version of Love is Blue. There's Moon River as well, which is of course, the Henry Mancini, Johnny Mercer perennial, which when this was recorded was really, at that point, still a contemporary song. And one of the tunes in here is a tribute to JFK, the man that indirectly inspired him during his funeral to take up this instrument that is not very common at all in jazz, which is the bagpipe. A Tribute to Courage, in parentheses, JFK, is one of the songs on the second disc of this 2 CD set that I really recommend to everybody out there, because it's a really fantastic album that will give you a great idea of the sound of Rufus Harley. You can seek out his 1970s and 1980s recordings after you hear this. I think this is the perfect introduction to the great Rufus Harley, who was born, as I said before, in 1936 and left us entirely too soon, at only around 70 years old in 2006. Actually, 2 years after his death, in 2008, filmmaker George Manney made a documentary about the life of Rufus Harley that, if you're interested in his music, you should actually watch. It's fascinating, and it's entitled Pipes of Peace from 2008. It has some old footage of interviews with Rufus Harley himself, and also people who knew him, people in his family, some friends. It's an absolutely fascinating documentary by George Manney that I recommend. If you enjoy the music on here, Courage, the Atlantic Recordings, Rufus Harley, don't miss out on that documentary from 2008 by George Manney, Pipes of Peace. And this brings us to the end of this video, in which we have talked a little bit about the life and the music and the legacy of a unique man in jazz. You will not find a lot of people like this jazz bagpiper, Rufus Harley from Raleigh, North Carolina, but always related to the city of Philadelphia. If you're interested in Rufus Harley, make sure to check out that 2 CD set and also the documentary Pipes of Peace. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez. Mine is the copyright of this video. The year is 2019, and this video was recorded live in Martin, in the state of Tennessee, in the United States of America. Thank you so much for your interest. If you want to leave some comments underneath the video, that will be much appreciated. Have a great day and keep listening to good jazz music, and thank you for watching the YouTube channel Anton GF. So long, everybody.